Australian cars built a reputation for being tough, simple, and built to survive anything this country could throw at them, but mixed in with the legends were some absolute mechanical nightmares. And I'm not talking about cars with a few annoying problems. I mean cars that overheated without warning, destroyed transmissions embarrassingly early, or became so catastrophically unreliable they earned nicknames the entire country still remembers. Welcome to the 15 Australian cars you should never buy, starting with cars that were merely badly engineered and ending with a machine so notoriously broken, its reputation became part of Australian car culture itself. The Ford XK Falcon was ripped from the American market and dropped onto Australian roads without meaningful local testing. It showed almost immediately. The front suspension was completely unprepared for corrugated rural roads and high-speed highway conditions. Premature tire wear, instability, and suspension noise became the defining ownership experience. Tires were a serious expense in 1960, and burning through sets early was a genuine financial problem for families who'd saved up for a new car. When buyers complained, Ford blamed the drivers, suggesting they simply didn't know how to operate the car correctly. Imagine paying for a brand new Falcon, having the suspension fail, and being told it was your fault. A masterclass in destroying brand trust before you've even found your feet. Holden's economy car was built purely to a price that announced itself the moment you sat inside. The trim rattled almost immediately, the interior quality was shocking, and the engine was so harsh on the highway that long trips felt like a form of structured punishment. That engine was officially named the Starfire, which tells you everything about the gap between Holden's ambitions and the mechanical reality. Australians quickly gave it a new name, the Misfire 4, not affectionately. It was rough, chronically unreliable, and had a particular talent for misfiring at the worst possible moments. Imagine spending your hard-earned money on a brand new car and genuinely praying it starts. That was Tuesday, in a Sunbird. This arrived just as Datsun and Toyota were proving cheap didn't have to mean terrible. Buyers walked into showrooms, compared the Sunbird to a bulletproof Corolla, and made the obvious choice. The Misfire 4 was painful. Coming up, a British car built on 1948 suspension technology and a rebadged Daewoo so comprehensively forgettable it somehow still managed to leave a trail of destruction. British Leyland gave the Morris Marina rear suspension technology that dated to the 1948 Morris Minor. Already ancient history when the Marina arrived in Australia. They used it anyway, because cheap was the only language Leyland spoke fluently. Handling was described by reviewers as wayward and unpredictable. Build quality was a joke. Brand new Marinas were spotted in showrooms already showing surface rust, which takes a remarkable dedication to failure. Mechanics loved them. They practically lived in the workshop, which was wonderful for everyone except the owner paying the bills. Outdated on arrival and consistently below average on every metric that mattered. The Holden Epica was a rebadged Daewoo wearing a lion badge and a hopeful expression, and it fooled precisely nobody. Underneath sat GM Daewoo engineering and, more critically, a timing chain with no intention of lasting the distance. Timing chain failures were well documented and expensive. When the chain stretched or skipped, the damage was catastrophic, not the kind of repair bill you budget for on a family car. Parts availability became its own nightmare as the years went on, turning routine repairs into extended expeditions through grey market suppliers. It was sold as a genuine alternative to the Camry and the Accord. It was neither European nor an alternative to anything anyone actually wanted, comprehensively forgettable, and yet somehow still managed to leave a trail of destruction on its way out. Up next, a German import that turned electrical faults into a full-time hobby, and a Ford whose transmission ended up in front of the Australian consumer watchdog. The Holden Vectra was an Opel imported from Europe and sold to buyers who wanted something different from the Commodore. The difference they got was an electrical system that had developed its own agenda. ECU failures, mysterious fault codes, gearbox gremlins, and sensors surrendering without warning became the Vectra's defining characteristics. Repair costs were steep, parts were slow to arrive, and finding a mechanic who truly understood the car was its own ordeal. The engineering underneath had genuine merit. When it worked, it was a well-sorted car. It just couldn't hold itself together long enough to prove it, which is, unfortunately, a fairly fundamental problem. Ford rushed the EA to market to beat the incoming VN Commodore, and the shortcuts became legend. The most infamous was sand. Foundry sand, not properly cleaned from the casting process, ended up inside the engine blocks, which were then shipped to dealers and sold to customers with a handshake and a smile. The abrasive particles destroyed engines from the inside out, and Ford's warranty department made a great many new friends in a very short period of time. The suspension felt equally unresolved, a development team that had simply run out of time. The AU Falcon gets most of the historical abuse, but the EA Series 1 was where the rot started, built to a deadline, not a standard, and it showed in every kilometre. The EA was broken before it left the factory, but one convertible leaked water in one of Australia's driest cities, and a small Holden, whose transmission waved the white flag embarrassingly early. The Chrysler Centura had a genuinely clever engineering concept. Basically mount the Hemi-6 deep for better weight distribution. Then American management stretched the nose forward to wrap around the engine exactly where it sat. The result was a nose-heavy car that dive-bombed under braking so severely that Chrysler installed special pressure valves just to stop it injuring its drivers. Overheating became chronic, a direct consequence of the cramped, poorly ventilated engine bay the redesign had created. The heat buildup caused ongoing reliability problems for the car's entire production run. Then there was the rust. Industrial action left these French-built bodies sitting on salt-laden docks for months. They arrived in dealerships already pre-corroded. Every single one of the 19,000 sold was a gamble, and most buyers lost. If you are enjoying watching this video so far, give it a like. The Holden Viva was a rebadged Daewoo Lacetti carrying ignition failures, overheating problems, and build quality that made buyers feel significantly less clever about their decision with every passing month. The ignition system had a talent for failing suddenly and completely, not with a warning light and a gentle cough, but immediately and without explanation, leaving owners stranded wherever they happened to be when it decided enough was enough. It was the automotive equivalent of a colleague who quits via text with no notice. Holden sold this on brand loyalty alone. It wasn't a Holden in any meaningful sense. For a few years, the name carried enough weight to cover for the engineering. Then the reputation caught up. We're not done yet. Coming up, a convertible built for export that couldn't handle Victorian rain, and a small Holden that somehow managed to be both unreliable and dangerous at the same time. The Ford Capri was built at Ford's Broadmeadows plant in Victoria to conquer the American sports car market. It had one fatal flaw: the roof leaked in Victoria, a state that receives perfectly normal, regular rainfall, and the soft top still couldn't handle it. The Australian-sourced fabric split in service, requiring a recall to replace it with European material. Water pooled in the floor pans, rusting brand new cars from the inside out simply because it occasionally rained. Add in scuttle shake, torque steer on the turbo, and a base engine producing just 80 horsepower. It was supposed to announce Australian manufacturing to the world. It became a punchline instead. The Holden Barina TK was a rebadged Daewoo Kalos, and its 4-speed automatic transmission had the lifespan of a houseplant kept in a dark cupboard. Shuddering, slipping, and outright failure arrived well before odometer readings that should have caused any concern at all. Cooling system problems compounded the misery. Overheating came without much warning and caused real damage when it did, turning what should have been a cheap, simple, small car into an ongoing financial drain. And if the reliability didn't put you off, the safety rating should have. The TK scored a 2-star ANCAP result in 2005, which for a brand new car in the mid-2000s was genuinely unforgivable. Resale values collapsed as the reputation spread through the used car market, proof that you can only borrow a brand name's goodwill for so long before the loan comes due. We've reached the top 5. Every car from here is a landmark of failure, including a British disaster that took a whole company down with it, a Ford whose transmission ended up in front of the consumer watchdog, and the single nickname that became shorthand for automotive disappointment across an entire continent. The Leyland P76 was developed in 16 panicked months on a microscopic budget, rushed to market with leaking window seals, blowing head gaskets, overheating V8s, and wiper motors not rated for heavy rain. A car so comprehensively unfinished, it still managed to win Wheels Car of the Year in 1973, before proceeding to destroy the company that built it. The commercial failure blew a $50 million hole in Leyland Australia's finances and forced the closure of their Zetland plant in 1974. The factory workers were, by multiple accounts, not heartbroken. Proof that ambition is no substitute for time, money, and engineering discipline. 3 things Leyland Australia had almost completely exhausted before the first car left the line. The Ford PowerShift's dual-clutch transmission shuddered, slipped, lurched, and hesitated in ways that made city driving genuinely unpleasant. Ford knew about the problems early. Their solution was a software update that addressed the symptoms without fixing the mechanical reality. Owners kept complaining. Ford kept offering the same update. It escalated until the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission launched formal action against Ford Australia, one of the most high-profile consumer protection cases in Australian automotive history. Ford eventually settled and established a compensation scheme. It took years to get there. A textbook case of a manufacturer making a bad situation catastrophic through consistent reluctance to acknowledge what was plainly in front of them. Only 3 remain: a car that failed publicly for 7 straight years, a Holden that helped kill Australian manufacturing from the inside, and the undisputed nickname-earning champion of Australian automotive unreliability. The Holden Chimera arrived as Holden's bold European future. What it delivered was piston ring sealing so poor that brand new cars consumed oil at rates that would embarrass a racing engine, firewall sealant that shrank and let water rot floors under warranty, and a manual gearbox that threw itself out of gear under normal driving. Multiple publications named it one of the worst cars ever built, anywhere. The platform underneath worked reasonably well in European applications. Holden's localization introduced problems that didn't need to exist on a car the company could not afford to get wrong. They got it catastrophically wrong, and a generation of buyers went to Toyota and didn't look back for years. The Holden Cruise was assembled in Adelaide on GM Daewoo engineering, and that combination proved lethal to Holden's remaining credibility. The 1.8-litre leaked oil and through electrical faults nearly impossible to diagnose. The 1.4-litre turbo became famous for water pump failures that caused catastrophic overheating. Early transmissions made the car genuinely dangerous in certain conditions. The RAC publicly warned consumers not to buy locally built Holdens. That sentence deserves a moment. A motoring organization telling Australians to avoid Australian-made Holdens. The Cruise didn't just break down. It helped break down the entire remaining case for keeping Australian manufacturing alive. Alongside the Captiva and the Barina, it formed a triumvirate of unreliability that made the closure of the Elizabeth plant feel, to some, almost inevitable. This is it, the car so reliably, legendarily, catastrophically unreliable that the Australian public gave it a nickname, the Craptiva, and it stuck so thoroughly that even dealerships eventually stopped arguing with it. Timing chain failures, transmission collapses, oil leaks that started early and never stopped, electrical gremlins that defeated mechanics and diagnostic computers alike. The 2.2-liter diesel, in particular, developed a reputation for self-destructing in ways that cost owners more in repairs than the car was worth on the open market. Holden had 12 years to address the fundamental reliability problems that defined this car's reputation. And the Craptiva remained, stubbornly, spectacularly, almost impressively terrible right to the end. It is the undisputed champion of Australian automotive unreliability. Some of these failures came from rushed timelines, some from badge engineering stretched too far, and some from manufacturers who knew about the problems and hoped nobody compared notes. And trust me, they always do. Well, here we are. I hoped I made some of you laugh. If you enjoyed watching this video, click subscribe if you want. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.